The destruction of the temple and the end of the Davidic kingly line did not defeat God's plan, nor did it destroy God's chosen people, but it did mark a new era in their history. This was the time of the diaspora, the dispersion of the Jews across many lands. After 70 years of Jewish exile in Babylon, Cyrus, king of the Persians, conquered the Babylonians and allowed the Jews to return to their homeland. Under the leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah, many Jews did return. They took possession of part of their former homeland, and they rebuilt their temple. But now the Jews were under foreign rule, even in Palestine. Many Jews remained in Babylon or traveled to other parts of the extensive Persian Empire. Later, when the Persians fell to Alexander and the Greeks, Jews gathered in the main cities of the two Greek empires that followed upon Alexander's conquests. The great cities of Alexandria in Egypt and Antioch in Syria became major centers of Jewish life. Populous Jewish colonies were to be found in most of the important cities across the two empires. The local synagogue took on new importance as a place of worship when so many Jews were far from their land and their temple. During this time of chastening and subjection, one of God's promises to the Jews took on a new and steadily increasing importance: the coming of the Messiah. From the earliest times of God's dealings with the Israelites, he had given them intimations and foreshadowings of his future plans. They had been taught, though they had often forgotten the lesson, that Israel's God was not merely a local deity, but the creator of the universe and the God of all the nations, and that Israel had a mission to all of humanity. Especially in the teaching of the prophets, they had learned that the Gentiles, the unbelieving nations, would come to know and worship the God of Israel. All the ends of the earth would hear his word. All the nations would come streaming to Jerusalem, and the knowledge of God would cover the earth as water covers the sea. At the heart of this future mission to the nations and of future glory for Israel was the promise of a coming anointed one, a Messiah or Christ, who would lead Israel to the fulfillment of God's promises. At the time of the expulsion of the first parents from paradise, God had made a promise that one of Eve's offspring would crush the head of the serpent. Later, Moses had spoken of a prophet like himself who would arise in Israel. During the period of the two monarchies, in addition to their denunciations of Israel's infidelity, the prophets had often spoken of a coming new age, inaugurated by a messianic, kingly figure who would arise from the decayed lineage of David like a sprout from a dead stump, and who would lead Israel to greatness, ruling with justice even the Gentiles. There was a foretelling of a new covenant between God and Israel, not like the old one on Mount Sinai. This new covenant would be written on the inner heart of each person. Side by side with these prophecies of glory and conquest, there were mysterious allusions to a suffering Messiah, a sacrificial figure who would save his people from their sins by taking them upon himself. The advent of a Messiah and the coming messianic kingdom was foretold with great force by the prophet Daniel, who identified 4 historical empires following one upon the other. These 4 were understood to be the empires of the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. Daniel prophesied that during the last of the 4 empires, that of the Romans, God himself would establish a kingdom led by a powerful messianic figure, a kingdom that would crush all others, that would bring the whole world under its sway, and that would never end. In the midst of their disappointments, defeats, and exile, the Jews pondered these messianic promises ever more deeply, and as the years passed, their hope and their longing for the coming of the Christ rose to ever greater intensity. One series of events during this period of messianic longing, when there were no prophets and no kings in Israel, deserves special attention. The experience of the Jews under the four empires spoken of by Daniel had been a mixed one. The first of the empires, the Babylonian, had destroyed their temple and exiled the Jews. But their Babylonian conquerors had at least allowed them to settle together in exile and to continue their common life. The second empire, the Persian, treated the Jews favorably, securing their return to the land of Israel and allowing the reconstruction of the temple. When, 200 years later, the vast Persian realm fell to the third empire, that of the Greeks, the Jews found themselves in the hands of two successor states, one in Egypt and the other in Syria, with the promised land an often contested frontier between them. The Egyptian successor state, the Ptolemaic Empire, treated the Jews on the whole well. But when control of the land of Israel was wrested from them by the Syrian Greek Empire, the Seleucids, things went differently. One of the Seleucid emperors, Antiochus Epiphanes, demanded that everyone in his realm should adhere to the Greek way of living and of worship, by force if necessary. He attempted to impose this policy on the Jews living in Israel by forbidding circumcision and demanding pagan worship, an act that led to the famous uprising of the sons of Mattathias, the Maccabees. Mattathias raised a revolt, calling the Jews to faithfulness to the law of Moses no matter what the cost. Through skillful guerrilla-style warfare over a number of years, Judas Maccabeus and his brothers were able to wrest control of Israel from the hands of Antiochus and the Seleucids. Their daring exploits were long remembered and fueled a tradition of zealous freedom fighting among the Jews. Their recapture of Jerusalem and their purification of the temple after its desecration by the Greeks is still remembered at the Jewish feast of Hanukkah, while the depredations of Antiochus have been a symbol of the recurring threat of a darkened world's hostility toward the colony of heaven living in its midst. The Hasmonean dynasty, as the descendants of the Maccabees were called, became kings in Judea and were able to keep the land free for a brief period, mainly by allying themselves with the rising power of Rome. But they were not of the tribe or the lineage of David, and so could not claim to be instituting a messianic kingdom. And after a brief period of independence, a Roman general conquered Judea and brought it under direct Roman rule. After again having tasted freedom, the Jews felt their subservience to a foreign power with bitter intensity. And when the Romans tightened their grip in the face of Jewish resistance, resentment against them was fueled to a fever pitch. There were popular Jewish risings against Rome, some of them claiming to be led by the promised Messiah. Israel was now in a ferment. Some groups of committed Jews were gathering together in communities apart. The Essenes were one such, in preparation for the Messiah who was believed to be coming soon. Others formed cadres of fighters, such as the Zealot Party, who plotted to overthrow Roman rule and to regain Jerusalem and Israel by force of arms under a Messiah general. Others, like the Pharisees, attempted to lead the Israelites into the strictest rules of priestly purity, thinking that such a purified people would be ready for the Messiah's coming. Others still, notably the Sadducees, looked for ways to accommodate the rule of the Romans for the sake of keeping the peace and maintaining the worship of God in the temple. All of Israel was in expectation, waiting, suffering, hoping, watching, longing, wondering. When will our Messiah come? What will be the sign of his coming? How will God establish Israel among the nations in glory? And why, oh why, is he waiting so long?